Sometimes one unit puts the team on their back. Today, that was the defense in London. Vikings moved to 5-0. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. Appreciate my hashtag everydayers so much, y'all that have been with me through thick and thin, through the 1-4s and the 5-0s, which the Vikings are now. So hello. If you're new here, hello, welcome, love you. Come on in, have a seat, get cozy, pour yourself a drink if you're into that. And let's talk about this Jets game. You can, of course, find the show wherever you find your favorite podcast. Just search out Locked On Vikings. That includes YouTube and Amazon Fire and Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. So, the Vikings win 23-17 is the final score. I think contrary to last week where I felt like the score was inappropriately close, it wasn't as close as it looked. This one was appropriately close. I think the Vikings sort of deserved to be in a one-score game with the Jets, and I think that they ultimately did just a little bit more and deserved to come out on top once you add up all of their mistakes and all of the Jets' mistakes and the things the Jets did well and that they did well. And that might be kind of a hot take because people who listen to the Jets stuff, like Locked On Jets people, which, by the way, I hope there are some Jets people in here. If you're a Jets person, you're listening in the comments, please shout out. Because there are some things in this podcast that are going to be for you that are just thoughts about how the Jets played that I think will also contextualize how we feel about the Vikings. But I want to kick it off with the defense because this was a game where the offense sputtered, and you don't have to take my word for it. Justin Jefferson started his media availability by being like, yeah, the defense bailed us out. Kevin O'Connell echoed similar thoughts. He gave a game ball to every player on the defense. It was a defense carries the team effort. The offense sputtered. Special teams was a disaster class. More on that later. More on both of those later. But let's start with the fun part, which is that the defense absolutely dominated. 17 points at the end of the day is a good output, but I think that the actual level of performance is better than good. I think this was a great performance by the defense in a lot of ways. I don't think it was all on them, but the Jets really struggled to move the ball. 7 of the Jets' 13 possessions were 3-and-outs. And that 13 is not, I'm not including any like kneel down crap or any like weird end of half. The Vikings got all the end of half stuff. No, 7 of 13 were 3-and-outs. That is a walloping on defense, even if some of those other drives ended up going there. So as you think about, and it's like weird because a 3-and-out is such a short part of your viewing experience, but it's so impactful. It's only 3 plays. So when you watch a 3-and-out and then you watch a 16-play drive, 16 of the 19 plays you just watched were part of a drive you didn't like. But really, the 3-and-out might have done more than the 16-play field goal drive, which the Jets also had here. A big part of this is 3 interceptions of Aaron Rodgers. A fun way to put this is a stat that I like, which is Aaron Rodgers said after the game he's never thrown 2 in the first quarter before, which he did in this game. So we're hanging firsts on Aaron Rodgers, and probably the last time the Vikings see Aaron Rodgers, unless he changes teams for like one last retirement tour with the Rams or something. But my favorite way to contextualize that is by looking at the other times in all of Aaron Rodgers' career that he's thrown 3 interceptions in a game. It's only happened 6 times. This was the 6th. The first 3 happened in 2008-09 when he was still very much a young quarterback getting his sea legs. Then one happened in 2017 in December. If you remember, that was the year he broke his collarbone at US Bank Stadium and had that like ill-fated attempt to come back because the Packers were still technically in the playoff hunt. They like tried and it was a disaster. He clearly wasn't ready to play and he threw 3 interceptions. And then the only other one was his final game as a Packer. the Kirby Joseph meltdown game. So these like infamous moments in Aaron Rodgers' legacy, or when he was still, a newer quarterback in his first or second year starting, that was the kind of Aaron Rodgers that we had. There was an interception to Andrew Van Ginkel where he just did not see Van Ginkel dropping out of the blitz, just didn't respect the sim pressure, maybe just didn't think that Van Ginkel could get there. Maybe he thought he could throw it faster than Van Ginkel could drop, but that ends up being a pick six. That is an electrifying play. That's a second touchdown on the season for Andrew Van Ginkel, which is wild. It's October 6th. And then on the very next series, which by the way, included in those 7 3-and-outs are these 2 interceptions that happened on the first third down of each respective drive. And then there was a Cam Bynum interception that was just a bad overthrow to Alan Lazard. It looked like that might have been something I'll get to, but it might have been a bit of a miscommunication. And then at the very end, there was one where it was, again, I think a ball placement miscommunication where he expected Mike Williams to maybe kind of cut something off, and the ball just didn't land where he wanted it to, and it ended up kind of right in Stephon Gilmore's lap as he was falling down. It was a really great like heads up play by Gilmore to have the wherewithal to kind of have the ball just like land on your chest and just like trap it, and you just have it. And that was actually the play that ended the game in the Jets comeback effort. The first drive, they actually got going in the whole game. So they started this game with 4 3-and-outs, including those 2 picks. The fifth drive, they finally got something going, and it turned into a Dallas Turner fourth down stop. It was just nightmare for the Jets offense. Just a nightmare. And like having them come to God. I mean, this is like people asking, wait, is Nathaniel Hackett still there? Is that a problem they should address? Like they're asking existential questions in New York because of the way the defense played. And it feels like you play the Brian Flores defense and you ask existential questions about if your franchise is headed in the right direction on the other way. Like there are so many shots of Vikings opponents and storylines coming out of the week after you play the Vikings of how messed up you get mentally and how you have to like make sure you don't lose your like team culture. It is wild, the mental toll that it takes on you just to like survive 60 minutes in the ring with a Brian Flores defense. But here's the thing that's interesting to me. I don't know how much credit the Vikings get because I think Jets' ineptitude does have to take some form of the credit. And one of the great skills of analysis that's really hard that nobody's good at is differentiating between when you did good and they did bad, and vice versa. If they did good or if you did bad, and like why was this the result? So here's my thing with what I think happened here with the Jets offense. I do think that they were forced into very uncomfortable situations. I think there were only a few specific answers, and I think Aaron Rodgers could find those specific answers because he's been in the league a long time and he's one of the greatest. And that's not to say that this was like a fake good game or anything like that. Like you can't cover everything as a defense. So making it hard to find that is sort of the goal. And I would say that most defenses would walk away with that and say, good, we did our job next game. But you can't cover everything. And Aaron Rodgers found the holes. But to utilize that, I think he needed to freelance with his ball placement a little bit. He had to go, you're throwing a go route. Well, now I'm going to put that on your back shoulder because the back shoulder's there. Go route's not there. You covered that, but the back shoulder part of it might be there. He was trying to beat the Vikings on angles and space rather than on like, matchups and 2-on-1s and finding ways to get open. It was more about angles for Rodgers. And he could find that space, but his receivers, save Garrett Wilson, who got like 20 targets in this game, was the only functioning thing in the Jets offense was Garrett Wilson. But a lot of those receivers weren't able to make the adjustments he had to. So you might hear a lot about like Aaron Rodgers having bad ball placement, but I'm not sure that it wasn't where he wanted those to be. He was expecting his receivers to make an adjustment. If you remember, in the end of the San Francisco game the Vikings played, that Jalen Nailor back shoulder thing that sort of sealed that game that Darnold threw that I went crazy about and I spent a whole bunch of time breaking down. That was Darnold making an adjustment to the coverage. He saw something in the coverage and he said, if I put this in this window, Nailor can get it, nobody else can, and I'm going to do that. But you had to trust Nailor to make that adjustment in a context where that ball kind of never is thrown that way. Like it's not really ever at that angle. So he had to trust that Jalen Nailor could have the wherewithal to make that adjustment, and he did, and the Vikings could kind of do that. And I think Rodgers made a lot of those plays, and the other guy didn't have the wherewithal to make the play the way he wanted to. And that is, I think, why he was frustrated. He was very visibly frustrated the whole day. I'm not sure that it was, and this might become the narrative. I just don't think that it's the case. Oh, Brian Flores was so confusing. He had Aaron Rodgers flustered and his head was spinning and Aaron Rodgers couldn't figure out the Flores defense. No, I think he did, but I don't think Alan Lazard could. And I think that was ultimately the problem. Plus drops. And later in the game, once the rain came down, there was the slippage of it all. Here's one way to put this, right? The Jets had 3 scoring drives. Those scoring drives came after a big punt return, short field. They scored a touchdown. They started a drive on the 2-yard line that went 3 and out, but after a roughing the kicker penalty, and I'll get to all these special teams gaffes, don't worry. But after a roughing the kicker penalty, it revived the drive, and then they drove all the way down to kicking range. They kicked a field goal. And then an interception led to a high-tempo drive where the Jets scored. The final touchdown was the last time that they would score. So the Jets couldn't score a touchdown once without the help of a special teams gaff or an offensive turnover. And they couldn't even score off all the turnovers, which, again, we'll get to. But that, I think, tells you the kind of day the defense had. 7 3-and-outs, couldn't score without help. That's kicking butt. What did not kick butt was the offense and the special teams. So let's go into some of those mistakes and also a little bit of what went well. And then we can kind of take stock of how we feel about the Vikings after this one. That'll all be next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs is more than just a job board. It's a social media. I mean, everybody has a LinkedIn, and a lot of people on LinkedIn are just there to keep, friends and maybe old coworkers up to date on what they're doing. They're not even necessarily looking for a job. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't bother visiting other leading job sites and might not even be actively looking, but your role might be perfect for them. And it might be something they're really interested in and they're just not actively searching. So you got to go on LinkedIn and take advantage of that huge market. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring, and over 86% of those small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode is also brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online therapy made easy. If getting into therapy is something that's difficult for you, maybe because you just don't feel like it's for you, I just encourage you to give it a try, no matter how you do it. But if it's about like scheduling, how am I supposed to, I'm not going to get off work every week. I'm not going to do it on a lunch break. When am I supposed to find the time? It's kind of what BetterHelp is designed for, to get you hooked up with somebody that can go by video chat or even by like phone call or even by like disjointed text, if that's what you're into. Whatever it is that works for you and your schedule and your needs, that is what BetterHelp is there to get you. So they'll hook you up with a therapist that's right for you. If you don't like that therapist, no problem. You can switch at any time for no additional charge. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done here, if you want more film breakdown stuff, you can go to patreon.com/LukeBrunnNFL. I've got stuff now that should all be free to watch from the Packers game and beforehand, and there'll be stuff coming up about the Jets game, of course, later in the week. So let's dissect all the problems here with the Vikings offense and the special teams. And I think the main thing is Darnold, this was by far his worst game. He was off accuracy-wise, was all over the place, made bad decisions. And there's a lot of factors that go into all of this. There's the big one that was just everything felt like a deep shot. And put a pin in that. We'll get to that. But I also want to give it up to the Jets defensive backs. And here's the other thing. If you're a Jets fan who has the courage to listen to Locked On Vikings after losing to the Vikings, here's your reward. I think that the Jets defensive backs actually played very well. They got flagged a lot, but they made a lot of really good PBUs, and they seemed to be very tight, breathing down Justin Jefferson's neck all the time. And I don't think they had a lot of help over the top. that is an accomplishment that nobody has done since like his rookie year. Like nobody. And people who tried it even in his rookie year got burned. He still got 92 yards, so I don't know how much you can call it a success plus all the penalties. But I think based on what I, as somebody who covers the Vikings, have seen every other time somebody tries that against Justin Jefferson, he goes for like 200. So I think that the Jets defensive backs can feel like they had an okay day at the very least. And I was impressed by it. But I will say that the physical nature of the Jets corners absolutely neutralizes Jordan Addison. I mean, that's exactly the kind of nightmare matchup that Jordan Addison is pretty bad at. And I think I overlooked that pretty hard. I kind of thought that they would get out of that matchup more, that they would do a better job of using motion. And I think the Jets did a great job of denying that. I think the Vikings tried, but the Jets had really good answers for that, and kudos to them. So they got the matchups on Addison that they wanted. They mugged him all day. Yeah, they got called for it a couple times, but they basically neutralized him, save for like one explosive, and then I think a speed out was the only other one he got. It's funny, we're talking about like a down day for Justin Jefferson. He got 92 yards, but no passing touchdowns for Sam Darnold, an interception that came at a ridiculously hideous time. Another turnover on this like toss play disaster that I guess you would call it on Ty Chandler, basically hit him right in the face. And I think a running back should be able to bring that in. And that turnover sets up the Jets with almost a defensive touchdown, ankle tackle from Sam Darnold. And then like 2 plays later is the Gink disaster pick 6 thing. So the Vikings absolutely get away with one there. And it shows like the Vikings struggled here, but I don't think that the Vikings offense struggled in a way that other defenses can like replicate, because nobody has Sauce and Reed. You have to have those guys to do what you did to the Vikings. And you probably have to have a slippery turf. That's the other thing, is the rain came in and both teams really struggled to get their footing, which meant that like running the ball became impossible because Ty Chandler had no burst. He has better burst than he showed in this game. He had really bad burst in this game, so he couldn't hit the hole in time. And that meant that the run game totally dried up. That meant that running routes was difficult. They had one with Addison running an out that would have converted a third down where he slipped and the other player slipped and fell down entirely, but neither of them could get to where the ball was thrown. Neither of them could get to their spot on time. And I think some of that might be, maybe you would expect Darnold to like adjust where he's throwing the ball to consider that everybody's a little less agile now. But I think that's a lot to ask. But I do think that like what I'm going to be curious about is when I turn on the tape for this game and look downfield, are receivers just falling over all over the place? Are they struggling to cut out of their breaks because of the turf? When the rain hit around the second quarter, things just dried up. But also, the other thing that happened around then is Aaron Jones got hurt. He has a hip injury. Kevin O'Connell said he hopes it's short term, but basically didn't know anything. You're going to have to get the testing. We'll get all the information when they're back in Minnesota and all that. So we'll have to wait and see what the deal is on that. But things super dried up once Aaron Jones was out of the game. And the thing is, it's like, you can't blame that much offensive ineptitude on losing a running back. Like, I'm sorry, Ty Chandler did fine in pass protection. You still kind of sucked when it came time to throw the ball. So you can, I think, blame a lot of the run game woes on that, but I don't think you can blame a lot of the pass game woes on that. And the thing is, the Vikings were like all pass game. It's Kevin O'Connell. They passed a ton, even with the lead, and they were aggressive with these. They weren't even conservative with their pass game calls, which is also a problem. I'll get to that. But I also want to, before we move on to kind of that overall strategy point and the criticism that I have of Kevin O'Connell here, I want to get into the special teams gaffes, because there are 4 major special teams errors. 1 is already going, you wish you had a better day. 4 is a catastrophe. 4 is getting lit up in the film room. Is Matt Daniels coming to Jesus and going, okay, do I have the right guys in there? And maybe a Caleb Evans gets replaced. Like, maybe you put somebody else in at gunner. I don't think that is wise, because I think Evans might genuinely be the best gunner on the team. Him and maybe Sherfield. But I think you're just putting in a worse player as a reactive thing because he got smoked by a really physical guy. But like, he got smoked by a really physical guy, which is all we're saying today. So here are the moments. You had a fair catch interference, which was Caleb Evans getting absolutely bullied and shoved into the returner. You have a near fumble from a Caleb Evans getting pancaked at Brandon Powell's ankles, and the ball actually lands. Luckily, he got smoked so bad that the Jets player that was destroying him, I think it was 19, whoever that is, the Jets player that was destroying him, like actually put him into the ground so hard that he shielded him from the ball, and the ball hit the back of the Jets player instead. Otherwise, it looked like a live ball, and the Jets thought it was a live ball, and they fell on it, and they would have had a short field there. You had a total overrun from the Gunners, which gave up a long punt return from an already backed up situation, which gave the Jets a short field, and that led to their first touchdown. And then you had a roughing the punter penalty, which happened after the rain started coming down and the turf was super slick. That soccer pitch was super slick. Ivan Pace going for a block. I don't blame him too much for this one because I think he slid more than he's used to, right? You kind of know where you are and aren't safe to start jumping at that thing, where to like time it right so that you're going to block it. But if you do miss, you're not going to get your roughing the punter penalty, but not if the turf is super slick and you slide 2 more yards than you thought and he bumps into the punter's toe. It's worth mentioning that that was very light contact, but any contact to the plant foot is a 15-yard penalty, just by rule, any contact. So it doesn't need to look bad to be roughing it's the roughing versus running into thing is not about the degree of the contact, which a lot of people thought it was, and were like really mad about that call. No, that call by the letter has to be a 15-yarder because it touched the plant foot, even though it was incidental and it wasn't that much. They just are protecting those plant foots, so you can't talk about that call. So a lot of special teams gaffes. That's too many special teams gaffes. Well, 1 is too many, but 4 is ridiculous. Even if you give grace on the Ivan Pace one. But what I don't want to lump in with this is Will Reichard, because Will Reichard was incredible in this game, arguably the difference in this game, making 2, I think one from 53-54. The 53-yarder was on terrible, slick, rainy conditions. It is so difficult to kick under those conditions, especially a long one under those conditions where you have to adjust some of your technique to get extra distance on it, on those long kicks. They have to kind of approach it different. Incredible performance from Will Reichard, 3 for 3 on his kicks. He doesn't count, okay? He's fine. He's baby boy, and we can knit him a sweater and tell him to go drink soup. Everybody else we need to go take into the basement to yell at. But ultimately, we have to decide what isn't concerning, what isn't fixable. As we go into the bye, what's the vibe now? So the Vikings are 5-0, and we can be really happy about that, but we all feel the collapse coming, don't we? Not because it's warranted, but because we're Vikings fans. So let's try to open up that little Pandora's box, shall we? That'll be next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, you can get the Vikings at plus 1,200 to win the Super Bowl if you are feeling so cheeky. And just so you know, they beat the second and fourth best teams on that list, the 49ers and Texans at plus 700 and plus 1,100, respectively. Big tie for fourth there. But you can get the Vikings at plus 1,200. You can start gambling on them to beat the Lions if you want, or whatever it is. If you think the world is just still counting the Vikings out too much, go find it. Put your money where your mouth is at FanDuel. Right now, you can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So $5 on whatever it is that you want, a crazy parlay, Sam Darnold at MVP, whatever it is, and you can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. So the Vikings are now entering their bye. They're one of 2 undefeated teams as of this recording. We'll see how Monday night goes for the Chiefs. But they're 5-0 at the bye. And that has happened a few times for the Vikings. It has happened. Here's the funny thing. I'll mention this stat here. 6 times a team has started 5-0 and missed the playoffs. 6 of them. There were 2 teams in 2009 that did it at the same time, which is kind of funny. Then there were also 2 times that the Vikings did it. And you're probably screaming to me about them. You remember them, the 2003, the Nate Poole, the whole collapse, and then the 2016 collapse as well, where they didn't even have drama at the end. They were playing meaningless games at the end. And no matter what you think of this Vikings team, if you've been a Vikings fan for any period of time, those teams are lurking in your brain. I know they are. I know that those thoughts are flittering around your head going, what if this is going to collapse like those ones did? Those happened not that long ago. I mean, the 2016, that was 8 years ago. 2003, most of us were at least alive. I was a kid. So the question of, are these cause for concern? These last couple of games where they haven't won quite as cleanly, are they cause for concern? Well, I went really in depth last week about how I thought the game against the Packers was far more encouraging than concerning, and not really. In this one, I think there are a couple of valid concerns. There are also a couple of performances that assuage valid concerns. The Viking corners playing as well as they did. Stephon Gilmore getting the pick at the end. Shaq Griffin getting a couple of very key pass breakups and not getting DPI against a crew that was calling it real tight. That is really impressive. Byron Murphy making a couple of great plays, kind of having a bounce back after the weird game he had in Green Bay. Very encouraging for a group that I was super worried about going into the season, right? And they continue to have these great performances, and it kind of, at a certain point, you go, okay, we have to adjust the expectation. I had the expectation of the corners that they were going to do some easy jobs and probably not make that many plays. No, well, now we actually can go into a game saying, yeah, I bet we're going to get a couple good plays from the corners today, and like have a lot of evidence backing that up. So great, that's awesome. But what are we actually concerned about moving forward as we now have like 13 days to stew on this before the Vikings play football again? Sam Darnold, right? This one's probably going to chill out the Sam Darnold, give him 40 million talk. Probably going to chill out his MVP odds a little bit because it was a game that everybody watched and he didn't play very well. That said, how concerned are you? And I think it's like I look at all of these Sam Darnold games, and while the result of it was different because of just how these things happened to go, and, who caught the bounces and were the receivers doing their job or not, and were the corners getting coverage or not. But I feel like Sam Darnold has played a lot of the same game. You have a lot of, ability to move the ball. And in this one, the rain kind of got in the way, and it's very clear that the rain was having an impact, and it's like super easy to write off. You could even just write it off as like weird London or playing one of the best defenses in the league. Like there's so many reasons you could write off a bad game here and not be that worried. It's just that it's Sam Darnold, and we're so predisposed to be worried about him that any little bit of confirmation, we go, there it is. The other shoe is dropped. And I don't even think that that's super wrong to do. Like priors matter, right? Much more than a maybe he had a hot month, which he's also known to have a hot month and then fall off. But we got to find out, right? And I think what this game means for me with Sam Darnold is that we're going to go into every game going, okay, but are we going to get Jets game Sam Darnold today or not? And I think every game it's going to take a couple drives for us to see whether or not we're going to get Sam Darnold from the Jets game, or we're going to get Sam Darnold from the Texans game or the 49ers game. It's just like absolutely dealing. And it'll, I think, take a few games of getting the good Darnold again before that thought stops creeping around in our head. But for me, the thing that I think most fixable here that bugged me was over-aggression. Been kind of saving this one for last. The Vikings were too aggressive in this game. Way too aggressive in this game. They were up by 3 scores, taking shot plays for the kill shot. And I don't mind that aggression, but I think when you have a lead, you have to be judicious about what spot. You cannot get the ball and go deep pass, deep pass, deep pass, punt. That is indistinguishable from the run, pass, punt that everybody hated from, the Zimmer years of running too much. Like run, pass, punt, or pass, punt. Like those are great ways to go 3 and out. And deep punt is a very good way to give a 3 and out. But I don't know how much of this was Kevin O'Connell, and I would imagine that if I grilled Kevin O'Connell on this, he would defend it. And I actually think somebody may have asked him in the press conference after the game about it. Certainly did last week when I had the same critique. And what he said last week probably applied again, which was, well, that was the looks we were getting. We were getting looks that we thought we had shot plays against, so we did those. And Sam Darnold has control of that lever as well. You noticed he would check into these a lot. He would actually see something at the line, whether it's the defensive structure or whatever game plan thing they came up with, and he would then, do this to his helmet. For audio listeners, he'd tap his helmet. He would check into that play. So it was his decision to go deep. Or sometimes I think it was a short to long read, and he would come off the short one and try something greedy. So I think Sam Darnold's greed, and he's always been a greedy quarterback, is like compounding with Kevin O'Connell's greed to create like a greed monster. And the Vikings got greedy. They got too greedy trying to put their foot on the gas and foot on your throat and let's run it up and all of these principles that sound super great, especially coming off of the Zimmer era, like late Zimmer 2020, 2021, where the problem was that they would like turtle. They would get too conservative and then they would go run, pass, punt and give up 3 and outs that way. The real problem here has nothing to do with the matrix of if you're being too aggressive or too conservative. It's don't go 3 and out. Get a freaking first down. Best way you know how. And I don't think that going for shots was the best way. Even if the looks you were given were like, that probably means single high. If that's what they're talking about. It's we saw single high, and that means that you're either getting man or cover 3, and we had a play checked in to be a shot against that could be a chunk. But that play probably has a longer drop back, and you have to block up for it. If it's against cover 1, you still have to get open, and the Vikings were doing a bad job of that, especially once you knew your receivers didn't have the footing there. The run game was also bad, and that isn't the alternative that I'm suggesting. I don't think that they necessarily could have run more. No Aaron Jones. Ty Chandler couldn't get his footing either. Like, you kind of have the same problems there. But what I'm asking for is to make life a little easier on yourself. Do a tunnel screen. Not like this really super precise slip screen stuff that that they tried one and like people were slipping all over and you couldn't be precise with your placement. That stuff is hard. I'm talking 3x1, Jordan Addison, motions inside, you throw it to him, you got 2 wide receivers blocking, and you see if you can't get a quick 7. Stick, little stuff, slants, little stuff, easy stuff. Especially when you have Sam Darnold in this like hero mode where every single time he's going for the kill shot and you got Kevin O'Connell dialing up kill shots anyways, somebody's got to chill you out and say, hey, can we just get a quick 5 and set up 2nd and 5 before we start going for all this crap? Like, can we just get our like 6-yard little easy check down? Give me that, a little curl flat or something like that. The stuff that Eli Manning will suggest all the time on the Manning cast. That's what I wanted from that. Easy stuff, not necessarily, shorter or longer or not run versus pass. Easy. Make life easier on you. And whether that means you're calling different options for Sam Darnold, and you're not giving him an aggressive thing to check into when you know that like those plays aren't working anyways, like just keep them out of the options entirely, or whether that means, calling something a little more tempo so that you don't have the checks and then you can actually get to the line faster and you can snap faster and maybe get something that way. Like there's so many other options that just don't make life as hard on yourself. I felt like they played that whole second half on hard mode and they just didn't have the juice to get it done. But dub's a dub. I'm complaining about a dub. That's not right? Like we can all be happy about this. And the fact is, all of these things I just spent 2/3 of the show complaining about were completely nullified because the defense absolutely slaughtered somebody again. And the defense keeps slaughtering somebody. Now the Jets helped slaughter themselves a little bit, but that doesn't, I don't think, take a lot of the credit away. We just have to be honest about that. But like, that doesn't mean the defense secretly didn't have that good a game. They were awesome. And they deserve all that credit, and they get to go into the bye going, all right, sweet, we're really good at this, and then they get to start preparing for the Lions. So that's going to be what's next. We'll go deep into this game and into the Vikings season so far over the bye week and all that, so I hope you will stick around with us here on Locked On Vikings. I will see you all tomorrow for Twitter Tuesday, so get your questions in. Google Forms in the show notes for that. You can send me an email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. I'll see you all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.